Hi, I suppose we're live now. Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this webinar. My name is Conor O'Brien. I'm going to moderate this illustrious panel today. We're here to talk about the North American cannabis industry. Really, we'll be building off the back of the North American Cannabis Report, which we released earlier this summer. So yeah, I want to maybe just give a bit of background on Prohibition Partners first, for anybody who doesn't know, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So Prohibition Partners is what we call the leading data and intelligence agency in the cannabis space. We are somewhat unique in that we produce reports and content covering pretty much the entire globe. So the entire cannabis globe, that is. So we produce big reports like the European report and the North American cannabis report, but we also have, reports for every region. We're working on an Asian cannabis report at the moment. We're working on an African cannabis report. We'll have a European CBD report coming out in the next couple of months as well. So in addition to our media group, Prohibition Partners also runs events. So the next one of note will be the Business of Cannabis New York event, which Leafly are also kindly sponsoring. So this event is going on early in November, and it basically is a gathering of all the industry experts in New York for a day-long conference, and everybody's going to get together and talk about the future of the cannabis industry in New York, which is, the fourth most populous state. It's going to be one of the biggest events in cannabis history when that state really gets going with their rec legalization. So yeah, our topic of conversation today, though, is the North American Cannabis Report. I hope everybody has had a chance to read it, but if not, it's freely available on our website, thanks to our sponsors, some of whom are with us today. The report covers pretty much all the sectors of cannabinoids in North America, so that's Canada and the US. We cover what's going on in medical cannabis, what's going on in adult use cannabis, and also in CBD. We look at everything, basically the trends in regulation and taxation, the legalization on a state-by-state basis, and also the prospects for federal legalization. We look at consumer trends, we look at public surveys. We've got loads of data in there, loads of interviews. There's everything you could want to know, basically. So yeah, again, you can find it on our website. There's also a section on Latin America that's available alongside it. So with that, I want to take a moment to let our guests introduce themselves. So I might ask Yoko to go first.
Thank you so much, Connor. My name is Yoko Miyashita. I'm the CEO of Leafly. For those of us who don't know Leafly, Leafly is an online platform, and we've really worked on building the informed way to shop for cannabis online. For over a decade, we've been educating consumers on strains, consumption methods, legalization, and lifestyle, and then helping them shop online with the largest community of retailers and brands in North America. And we do this through our content. You know, we've had a award-winning editorial team. It's published over 11,000 articles. You know, our strain database, renowned worldwide, is over 6,000 entries strong now, and over 1 million reviews, where consumers have told us the unique effects derived from various products and strains that they try. But very happy to be sharing the stage here with you, Chris and Lucas, today, and excited about the conversation.
Thanks so much, Yoko. Maybe Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Chris Mylan, VP of Sales for Cannabis ERP. We provide basically the technology to run the cannabis company on. So we do in North American base, we have team members in Canada as well as the US. We do have done some stuff overseas as well, but we basically take LPs and multi-state operators and help them run their business on a platform that's a single platform that helps them with costing, compliance, traceability, all of those things that are important for a business to run, including in financials and inventory management. So we basically run the business on our platform. We work with kind of small, medium, and large. We've got some craft cultivators. We also have just processors only. But we basically are really strong in reporting, understanding the costing, which is so important. Cost per gram is, you know, something that needs to be watched every day, especially as margins continue to drop. But we have over 60 brands, logos across North America. We've done work in Europe. We've done stuff in Australia as well. But again, thanks for having us, and it's exciting to have this panel with us to answer hopefully some good questions.
Cool. And Lucas?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. My name is Lucas McCann. I am the CSO and co-founder for CanDelta. We're a regulatory and scientific cannabis consulting company with also a new focus on psychedelics. Very quickly about my background, I'm a synthetic organic chemist, worked for the federal government, and I've been following legalization activity across North America for the last 5 years, specifically Canada and the US. Our branch has expanded from our headquarters in Toronto to offices in Hackensack, New Jersey, and recently in Manhattan, New York. And we've been assisting folks that launch businesses. We've done approximately 250 business launches, which has been no easy feat, especially in Canada, where you have to build billions of dollars worth of facility before you'll even get Health Canada to take a look at your application. And yeah, very excited for the dialogue and the discussion with everybody else on the call.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. I think we've got a really good spread of businesses across the industry. A wealth of knowledge, I'm sure. So let's get going with the questions then and get into it. So the first question I wanted to field was about the current administration, the Biden administration in the US. Obviously, so everybody got super excited when the Democrats took Congress back at the last election cycle. Everybody thought, oh, you know, that's like a stone's throw away from, say, decriminalization, maybe even federal legalization. Some people are a little bit miffed at about how far the Biden administration has managed to get. So, yeah, just like broadly speaking, how do we feel they've done, and like how do we feel this administration might act in the future, not with, considering that we have midterms coming up and everything. I might ask Yoko first.
Let me unmute myself. Hard to really answer that question without expressing disappointment, given the build up to it. At the same time, we are cautiously optimistic, and just watch the movement, what's happening in the states. We've got 5, 6 states, very red states with ballot initiatives in the fall election cycle, which means, assuming those pass, half of Americans could be living in a legal cannabis state by 2023. That's big. And, regardless of the pace of what's happening at the federal level, I just view this as the encircling activity of the states really driving this agenda. And I do think this is an if, not when. And I think this is what we say across the industry. Yes, we would love to see the administration moving faster and delivering against some of those promises made early in the election cycle. And at the same time, the reality of what's actually happening is that we see more and more states legalizing. And, this is something that we always put our weight behind, because we know what legalization brings. Reduces the illicit market, safer tested products, reduces access for teens and young people because of the effectiveness of ID checks, and really the economic engine, the jobs that it creates. And by our jobs report and our measure, 428,000 full-time jobs in cannabis today in the US. So yes, not moving as fast as we'd like, and we're cautiously optimistic about where that train's headed.
Yeah, if I could jump in there too, Connor. I mean, there's, I think, a certain level of legalization or decriminalization that we really take for granted in the U.S. If we look at our neighbors to the north in Canada, what they've done with regulation, CBD and THC are held up on the same pedestal. But with the 2018 Farm Bill, half of cannabis effectively is legal in the U.S. already. And I really think it's important to highlight that, because it's not the case everywhere else. You can't go into a pharmacy and buy CBD infused products. There's no CBD hamburgers. Those products are explicitly being sold at cannabis retail stores in Canada. And with the new movement around, or the hearing around Delta 8 THC, which is effectively THC, just with the location of a different double bond also being legal, folks do have access to substances that are being derived from subspecies of the same species. Hemp is cannabis. It's cannabis sativa. It's just different subspecies with different phenotypic expressions in the flowers. So, I think it's important to salute what's sort of been done. But what is, I think, probably more important to recognize is how it's been scheduled as a Schedule I drug under the Federal Controlled Substances Act since 1970, which is basically saying this is a substance with no accepted medical use. And from what we've seen in the literature for medical studies, up until this point, the scientists are screaming that this is simply not the case. And Epidiolex is a great testament to that. There are many other synthetics that synthetic cannabinoid-containing drugs, or drugs that contain cannabis, that have certainly done wonders. So I think it's really important that the administration at some point address the fact that they've made these promises. If you go to joebiden.com/Black America, that promise is still there in black and white online on their website. So we can, as Yoko said, hope to remain optimistic, but cautiously.
First of all, how great is it to have a chemist on the call with us? Because I did good in chemistry in college, Lucas, but I got an accounting degree and I failed on my engineering degree. I kind of agree with both of you. For me, it's extremely disappointing, and the Fair Banking Act, we kind of knew that was going to fail, and epically failed. But we're starting to see banks kind of jump the shark on that, and instead of just some other smaller banks get into the mix. I think the states continue to push this forward, and I think that's where I'm excited to see. I never thought I'd have a customer in Texas. Who would have thought Texas of all has 3 or 4 cultivators now that are doing some medical, very strict guidelines around what it can be used for, but we've got something going, right? So that's the part that I get really excited about. As the states, I think, are just going to continue to drive this forward, and eventually just going to push it. It's important, and I always watch the ballots, right? Who's trying to go rec? I think the more push we get around rec across the country, I think we'll continue to drive the administration to kind of make a move. But they obviously have had other priorities in the first couple of years here of Biden being in charge. And hopefully we can continue to drive the agenda forward. And even the excitement around, and I don't know if you've all seen it, is I forget which senator is pushing a new bill to try to drive smaller cultivators in legalized states to be able to deliver their product across state lines. So trying to help out the little guys, the craft brewer cultivators, and compete against the MSOs. And that bill is, I know they're trying to work through there right now, but that's exciting to see that kind of legislation. So we're starting to see some push by the states to try to keep pushing the curve up, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I saw that recently. It would really be great to see the craft growers given that leg up with the cross-border sales. So like thinking about how, so okay, I get it that legalization is progressing. It's being driven by the states. We might hit a critical mass where the federal government says, oh, you know what, it's already legal in like the majority of our country. We might as well recognize it in federal law. And I'm just thinking now, what you guys think? What does the U.S. look like after federal legalization? And like, there's so many ramifications between like, so within the U.S., but also between the U.S. and Canada, and also the U.S. and internationally. What do you guys think of when you think of a world with a federally legal U.S.? Maybe I'll keep it with Chris for now.
Okay. Yeah. So, it's a great question. There's so many different things around regulatory that, do we follow the alcohol and wine industry? I tend to kind of always look at that as kind of where this will go when it goes federal. But I can also see it just pushing all at the state level for regulatory. I'm not sure how much, how that's going to play out. When I think about what does it look like for a cultivator, processor, people that are in the business today, I think at the end, big tobacco comes in strong and fast as you're starting to see some of that. I think they're going to buy up a bunch of MSOs. I think they have to understand how to actually do this right. And why reinvent the wheel when there's a lot of really good companies out there that are doing a great job. So I think at the end of this day, a bunch of those MSOs are going to get purchased. I think there's probably 4 or 5 that end up being outside of the big tobacco group. And I still think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on a small craft. But I think at the end of the day, those craft cultivators, they have a good product, and there always will be a market for that. There's always those consumption users that are going to be, super excited about, having those smaller craft strain profiles that they really enjoy. So I mean, that's kind of where I see it going. I'm still trying to figure out the regulatory part of, does that really stay at the federal level, or are they going to push that responsibility in, since it's already at the state level? I would prefer to have it at the federal level like we have in Canada. I like only having one report that I have to build for our growers and processors and for the LPs, instead of maintaining, I think I'm maintaining 14 state compliant regulatory integrations that I have with my system right now. That's not fun because they change all the time. So we're constantly having to update and keep that up to date, which, it's fine, but that's painful. So I hope that's not the trend as we go federal, that they push it to the state, but that could happen, right? That could take some of the burden off. So we'll just have to wait and see, but that's kind of where I'm seeing it all going, and kind of regulatory is a big one. And then, who gets consumed by big tobacco as they try to jump in.
Yeah, I guess maybe just really excited to piggyback off of Chris's points there. There are some very short-term goals that I think will be achieved with federal legalization. That would include, for example, improving access to folks, hopefully some kind of reform that would allow expungements. But I'm really liking the fractured approach that a lot of states are sort of taking. And when we look at U.S. legalization, it is very fractured, right? You go, 100 miles in any direction, and the whole regulatory system is completely different. And that's very similar to what we see in Europe. where each individual country has its own framework. Each individual state in the U.S. has also done that. Let's maybe like focus in on the tri-state area. So New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. They've taken a very unique approach to this, specifically New Jersey and New York. In New Jersey, they are prioritizing certain groups of folks, which I think is an awesome means of helping to reconcile those who have been disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. And I'm curious, I wonder if that would be the same kind of approach that the US would take at a federal level to help unroll this out. And what I think would happen in the case if that wasn't necessarily the case is that you're going to have MSOs come in and effectively, you know, all the middle-aged white guys in boardrooms with trust funds backing them up, and many investors sort of coming in and just taking the industry over, when perhaps it should go to the folks that were again disproportionately impacted by prohibition. So in New York, they have the Seeding Opportunity Initiative, which has a strong focus on those who are already based in New York. So hemp farmers who are already been growing and cultivating hemp in the space, we're the ones who are allowed to be the first cultivators in the state of New York. All the products that are grown in New York will be the only products that are sold in New York once that happens. In New Jersey, it's those that are, for example, diversity groups, right? People that live in high impact zones who have been sort of over policed for this, and again, folks who have been impacted by charges in the family. Like I think that's a very unique but a very positive way of looking at that rollout. And I'm just a bit suspicious if it were federal again that would be the case, is putting the power back in the hands that have been of the folks who've been most affected by prohibition.
Yeah, I hate to disappoint Chris, but it's going to remain highly fragmented even with federal legalization. This is going to sit at the states. Who can sell this? Who can grow this? That is my bet. I don't believe that changes. One of the interesting angles about thinking about this, and I look a lot at Health Canada and what you've done in Canada, is this is such a unique product. And Lucas, you can speak to all of the research around, of course, there's recreational use, but there are highly applicable medical implementations of cannabis, right? This is how we got to legalization in the first place. So how do you start to think about what does the FDA do? Clearly, they've failed on the CBD front, trying to assess claims, to regulate claims, but you can't change this. We consider it the magic of the plant, the complexity of it, all the potential applications of it, and who comes in to regulate which parts, I think is one of the interesting aspects to look at when we start to consider what federal legalization is. There are all the market efficiency pieces of being able to just interstate commerce. That's going to be huge. The one other thing I wanted to go back to with respect to your first question and just highlight a couple of points also is that federal legalization, timing, we're all disappointed with the speed of it, but you've got to watch what the rest of the world is doing. We've got a close eye on Europe and Germany driving towards rec legalization. And how does that start to set the narrative? And where do we get closed in on the North American side? I think you've got to watch for that carefully. The other piece is also that consumers are speaking, and you've got 90+% approval rates. Like all of that factors into how do we liberate this product and how do we put it into the hands of consumers who want it. All of that's going to have these really interesting push-pull factors across all of these different topics we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And then if you look at even in the other countries, like watching Germany, watching South Africa, we've been involved in Australia. They haven't moved super fast. Some of these countries are moving as slow as we are, which is, everyone's trying to figure it out. I think that's the biggest thing. The crystal ball's hard because everyone's trying to do it correctly, and no one has great answers yet. So I think that's part of the dilemma that I think a lot of the countries are in.
And from the businesses that you all talk to, or perhaps your own businesses, when you think of the US being federally legal and now this like wall around imports and exports to and from the US going down, do a lot of your, say, clients or partners think about like expanding as soon as that wall comes down? Are we going to see a rush of imports from, say, like low cost production countries, or is it still going to remain in state? Like, what do you think?
So if you think of Canada and the LPs there, they have done their homework and have, when they first got legalized, is try to figure out how they get in the other countries and start moving product around. So, a lot of the large LPs that we work with, they already have sister companies in different countries, and they're trying to set that up so that they can move product back and forth. I don't know how much U.S. has thought about that yet. I mean, there's been two different approaches between Canada and the U.S. and how this all rolled out, right? And I think Canada went for world domination, and I think the U.S. is like, I think there's less cash available and to build the business out, and I think they've been trying to be more profitable at the get-go instead of doing what the market dictated, which is what we saw a lot in Canada in the early days.
I have a question off of that one, Chris. Did Canada go for world domination simply because the consumer TAM simply it doesn't, right? Supply demand dynamics there. Did they go for world domination because the market required they go for world domination versus?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we work with a lot with the big CPA firms up there, and we're all like this doesn't make sense what they're trying to do. Like, we're rolling out implementations, and they're trying to help them on the taxation and just the accounting side, and we're all like, you need to be profitable. But the money was flowing, right? They had so much private equity money, and the ones that went public had all kinds of money. And I think they just listened to what the market kept doing. It kept buying up, and there's overspending on the buys, to get bigger and bigger. And you're doing 1 million square foot grow facilities, and there's no supply and demand for that, right? So now margins are dropping like nobody's business right now, which we saw in Colorado early, because we had a customer in Colorado very, very early, right? And they lost 50% margin after a few years because there's just more product. So I think that really hurt. And the consumption rate is the size of Texas in Canada, right? Canada's a very large country, but the population isn't really that large. So I think they just the oversupply, and now everyone's trying to figure it out. It's been hard.
To that point, the way that cannabis legalization is rolled out in Canada is much more representational of what pharmaceutical manufacturing looks like. Yeah. When we work with folks in the U.S., we kind of think of this in some of the mature markets as the Wild West in terms of how folks are even entering a lot of the grow rooms. PPE is optional in many of these production facilities. In Canada, the cultivation and the processing of cannabis and cannabis products is done almost in an environment that's similar to how COVID vaccines are being manufactured. And that has really set them up for success for being able to export into Europe. Now, a lot of those sort of mature operators that are existing in the US would not be able to apply for the certifications required, namely EU GMP, so good manufacturing practices under the European Union, to be able to move that product out simply because their practices just fall short of that. They just simply do. There's certain guidelines and environmental controls that have to be put in place. And for those that have sort of already set up shop, they're definitely at a disadvantage. I would hope that the US would take an approach similar to what Canada did, and that's a very protectionistic approach on the economy or the cannabis industry. And that is to say that no products in Canada that are consumed in Canada are grown or effectively produced or processed outside of Canada, with a few exceptions of maybe particular medical products. And again, we're going back to things like Epidiolex, which helps control seizures in instances with folks suffering with Dravet syndrome, as an example. So again, having that very, very overregulated framework is a huge hump for those. It's a huge capital expenditure for those folks setting up their business. But in the long run, they get to play into these other markets, and where they do have these medical frameworks set up. Having said that, we joke all the time that the infused cannabis edible products that you eat in Canada will actually be the cleanest food you will ever consume in your lifetime, simply because of how overregulated those food production facilities are that are infusing those products, right? You have effectively a pharmaceutical grade chocolate bar, which would almost certainly be cleaner than anything else you would buy at a retail store, such as like your Caramilk or your O. Henry's. So
how much is too much? How much is too much regulation? How much is differentiating? How much is protectionist? And how much is actually impairing the market in Canada? And
Sure.
You're coming up for a 3-year review, right? And what does that mean? We look as an advertising platform for retailers and brands, and what you can or can't say about the plant. We think it's madness, simply because how do you communicate? Why are we in this business? What we're here to really democratize the power of the plant. And when you can't talk about the plant in its entirety and the properties and the science and the research emerging, who are you serving? So I am 100% in support of safe, tested products. But where's that line?
No,
where is that?
It's such a good point. And Lucas, you're absolutely right. When I think about our success in Canada, so quickly and early is because we came from food and bev. So we understood FDA, traceability and compliance and regulatory. And everyone we talked to up there in the beginning, early days, 17, 18, 19, it was like, we think we're a pharmaceutical company. Like that's just the mindset of Canada. And I think, because we support GMP and we also support the European version of that, I think that's why we resonated so quickly up there, is because of that background. And you're absolutely right. They think of themselves as a pharmaceutical company completely.
Yeah, so this plays a lot into like the next question. I think we've already kind of touched on it. Like when I was looking at North American companies, even for the global report that we released, the companies in the US seem to be doing a lot better. They're quicker to be profitable than the Canadian ones. Matt Lemurs covers this a lot in MJ Biz, the kind of shrinking margins for large players in Canada. Is there any other reasons that we've mentioned so far? Is it just that they had access to capital and that they've got a smaller population? Does anybody else think there's other reasons?
I mean, I don't think there's a lot more, when I just think about how it all, just watching it roll out, right? I think the US just smaller footprints because of what you can do by state, right? You can, which your max in Washington is 20,000 square feet, I think, or 25. So, they're much different looks at how you're going to build that out. So I think they're thinking about profitability. I think their cash has to go farther. And because it's not federal, they're thinking about the state they're in, and they're not really thinking about 6 states. Now that's changed dramatically in the last 2 years because everyone's thinking, I'm going to be a multi-state operator. I need something. I want to build it now, and I want to have a system that I can look at all my facilities across different states and why is this cost per gram higher or lower, and what's my operational efficiencies. They're trying to get those KPI dashboards built now, right? But I still think they're really watching the cash outlay of how they want to build this out, and they want to be profitable. And I think the MSOs are they don't jump in every state, right? Some of them are keeping them out. Oklahoma, other places where they're like, no, I want Oklahoma people, and I want Missouri people, and I want Montana people. And they're trying to protect the small guy, Lucas, to your point before, which I love, right? You can't, you don't want just all MSOs in every state. But I think the MSOs are also being very careful about what states they're in and which ones are good states. And there's states that are, based on regulatory and, how much they can grow and how does their dispensaries look can change what their profitability looks like. And I think the smarter MSOs are very conscious of that. And I think they're building out where they know that, and they're going all in on those states where they know they have to go all in on. And they're
I mean, going back to your initial point, Chris, there's going to be a huge emphasis on craft product. Like there is a ratio that you can use to sort of calculate what constitutes craft. And that's looking at the number of plants versus the number of people tending to those plants. And there's a sweet spot there that if you overcome that sort of level, you're in a higher number of plants and you have people to look after them, then you're a big manufacturer, and the quality of the product will probably likely suffer in the end. When we're working with folks that are starting up new businesses, and they're doing that because there is a huge demand for craft product. There's a huge demand for that, just like we see in the alcohol industry, especially around craft beer and craft wine. People love craft product. Having said that, people are coming to us with these great dreams about exporting to Europe and exporting to these other medical markets. And that's great, but you really need to be able to cater to your local community first. You need to be focused on, creating a building and selling your first product and making your first dollar, as opposed to worrying about things like EU GMP compliance. There are probably 750 licensed producers in Canada. The ones that have EU GMP certifications, you can probably count on maybe 2 hands. So that's definitely a signal to how important it necessarily is, and sort of what kinds of companies are going after that level of certification. I think what's important is catering to your local community and what they want, creating a destination with your facility when you're setting up shop. And we've seen this with farm gate retail stores, cannabis retail stores located on site. And with Health Canada research licenses and certain other state regulations, you can have sensory lounges or consumption lounges that exist there. It's similar to what you'd have in a sommelier wine tasting room, and then allow folks to exit through the gift shop, and creating destinations for cannabis, as opposed to sort of these big multinational pharmaceutical manufacturing lookalike exporters. And I think that's really important for folks that are getting into this business and starting out.
What I love what you're touching on, Lucas, is the community aspect of this plant, right? It's very social and communal in nature. We saw a lot of transition to online shopping, online research through COVID, but what happened as soon as, all of the lockdowns ended, we saw consumers wanting to go back into the stores. And to us, that really speaks to this nature around this plant is communal. People want to talk about it. They want to engage with it. They want to be on site, to your point of, being on grows and being able to buy out of the gift shop. And I think that's something very unique about this that has very much a wine feel to it, a craft beer feel to it. And that we see that within our community as well, across our millions of consumers.
Yeah, I agree. And I like, I can't wait for Vegas, because my favorite part is getting my customers together. And this is where Lucas was going with the craft. I love to get my head of cultivations going with my guys that kind of do it differently, and the craft guys, because one goes, you have to hand trim. There's no way you can make a great product unless you and I got my eyes going, Twister's the way to do it, man. Just get it done. And we've done the taste test, and it doesn't matter. I love the banter that we get when we get our customers together. It's so much fun, because the craft guys have a way of doing it. Like they know this is the way to make a really high quality product, is to do it X. And I know the other guys are always like, nah, that doesn't matter. It matters. So it's just fun to listen to them go back and forth and have that debate. And we just start drinking, and it's just a fun night of listening to everyone and learning so much about, how they all do it differently, and they learn from each other. And it's just a fun part of it. But the craft guys are very religious on how they're going to do it, for sure.
Awesome. I might go on to a kind of big old question. What are you guys looking forward to most over the next 12 months in terms of legislation? Or it could be something to do with the midterms. It could be something to do with your own company. What's on your minds for the next 12 months? Sure, Lucas, you can take it first if you want.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm hoping that we see deregulation in areas such as Canada, as it pertains to, for example, the 3-year review of the Cannabis Act, which is almost a year overdue now. I think we need to have a few things done, specifically in Canada. So excise reform would be fantastic. A lot of craft producers, smaller standard producers, are really suffering, and even some of the larger cultivators are suffering with the amount of tax and excise that they're paying to the government. And there's not necessarily a complete dedicated sort of social programs or infrastructure funding that is being used for. We had some folks representing CanDelta at the Hall of Flowers that's happening in Toronto this week. Excuse me. And that's where retailers get together with the licensed producers. Everyone's talking, and they're all becoming friends. One of the biggest boosts that were set up there was the provincial wholesaler there, and it's a publicly funded, necessary entity that all the LPs have to sell to, who then get to decide what products are sort of listed. And I think it's just a testament that government has sort of gotten involved. They're playing a dual role. They're acting in competition with a lot of the retailers. And I think seeing that decoupling from the public sector and this private industry would be fantastic. That might be hopeful. And again, maybe some kind of conversation about how we can have relaxation on things like packaging and labeling requirements, and perhaps to Yoko's point on marketing and advertising. That would be fantastic for Canada. For the US, hope to see a lot of these states come online, at least for medical and for rec use in the future, and that I hope with public consultation that they will do or invoke sort of similar programs such as the Seeding Opportunity Initiative in New York, or the conditional licenses that are being offered in New Jersey, and allowing folks who have been sort of impacted by prohibition to get those licenses first, keeping the business well within their states, to allow those that have grown up there, lived there, have started families there, to be able to operate first before sort of opening up the floodgates. I'd like to see that continue. And then maybe, once the US is ready, allow for sort of a federal framework to come into place. But, my best guess for that is going to be well beyond 5 years. I think we're looking at 2029 at the absolute earliest, and that even has some level of optimism in it as well. So probably sometime in the 2030s, but eventually I think is bound to happen.
That's a very ambitious year, Lucas. we're super excited about East Coast, right? And watching these major markets open up for rec use. These are going to be the largest cannabis markets following California. And what I love about watching this space and being a participant here is each state is building on what they've learned from prior. What happens with New York licensees in terms of how they actually tackle the social equity issue, conditional licenses in New Jersey. Like, these are test cases, and what will we learn out of this, and how does this inform, whether it's Canada, whether it's Washington State, for example. We've just passed 10 years and we're looking at a 2.0 bill. How does that inform how we go back and retrofit existing state legalization schemes? Like, that is, from a policy perspective, very interesting, and obviously market size and opportunity. In terms of what comes online as a result of fall elections here in the US, we're keeping a close eye on that. But ultimately, this piece around just continuous momentum, science, research, and data that continues to inform and educate consumers on what is capable and what can be achieved with this plant, as well as those limitations, what we learn of what it's not good for, will remain focused there. One other thing that we're looking at, and we've got an upcoming report around this, is you've got to remember, with this plant and this industry and this market as a whole, the demand's there. And it's ultimately about transitioning spend from illicit to licensed. So really some policy points around this reticence, and opt-outs are huge, even in legalized markets. And what does that actually do? It actually makes it more unsafe for consumers. So how do we change that and drive that policy discussion around why we need to have local municipalities opting into legalization as part of state legalization frameworks, I think, is a big part of our conversation ahead.
Yeah, because there's definitely been some opt-outs, right, at the city level. It's very interesting to watch. When I'm going to throw just a whole monkey wrench into this thing, so I'm kind of watching Mexico. That could have a pretty big impact on what's going on in North America. And they're getting pretty serious, and it's moving along. And there's been some shows and some conferences, and the cost per gram down there is really, really cheap. And it's how's that going to affect the illicit market and the battle that's going to happen down in Mexico all around that. But it will affect North America. So I think that's a country that could have a pretty big impact up here.
I mean, to Yoko's point, and yes, Yoko, I agree. Like the science around it, the research around cannabis and the effects are great. I think that there are a lot of purists around the plant as well that we also need to be careful of, that sort of deny that cannabis might not be appropriate for every possible use case. And we need to be very, very honest in these conversations, right? We need to look at the data, and we may discover that maybe cannabis isn't the right product that we go and pursue. It's something else. And if that's the case, as scientists, we need to react to that data, as we do when we're looking at any kinds of things, like, for example, pandemics or the use of vaccines, right? You always look at the best available data you have, and you make a decision on that. That's the definition of science. But if we're also tipping our hat to cannabis, it's probably important to maybe even bring psilocybin and its use in psychotherapy as well. Yeah. I mean, that's got a lot of promise from universities like Johns Hopkins, who've been a leader in what that could look like for cessation for tobacco, alcohol, and with the rollout that we have now in Oregon, and the special access program that was rolled out by Health Canada January 5th of 2022 this year, allowing folks to get access. I think that's going to be the little brother, the little sister of cannabis that might even sort of overtake it and run past it in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those insights. Thanks for the curveball, Chris. Thinking of, yes, we're almost finished, but thinking of the things we're looking forward to. Yoko, you've got some big event coming up soon enough recently, right?
We have an event together with Prohibition Partners because we're going to be celebrating International Bud Tender Day, which I will be totally upfront. It's a Leafly created holiday to celebrate bud tenders. These are the folks at the front lines who keep this industry rolling. It's something we started last year, and we're really excited to be hosting a celebration event with you folks in Hoboken. And our head of data science, Dr. Nick Jackomas, will be there. to give the latest on the research, as well as we'll have a terpene bar and more, and more information coming soon on this, but very excited to be putting an event on.
Yeah, should be great. Thank you so much for being a part of that as well, being such a big part of it. And thank you all again for continuing to support the work of Prohibition Partners and participating in the webinar. It's we're all super grateful, and I'm sure our readers are grateful that they get all the reports because of this. I'm sure we could keep going on for hours even. I would love if we could all sit down at a bar and continue this conversation, but perhaps that will wait till the next conference that we're all at. So yeah, with that, I guess we'll wrap this up and wish you all a good evening, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Connor, and Prohibition Partners.